Last year was pretty big for Dragon Ball, because within the same week we got the most successful Dragon Ball game of all time and a brand new anime co-created by Akira Toriyama. And since I was constantly playing Sparking Zero and watching Dragon Ball Daima at the same time, it gave me the idea to do a review of both of them. Especially for modern games like this, it's good to review them months after they come out, because it's good to take a look at them after they've had all these updates and DLC. Though in Sparking Zero's case, the game is almost half a year old and hasn't really had that many substantial updates since launch. Plus now that Dragon Ball Daima has been over for a while now, it's a good time to take a look at them both. I figured by the time the show ended, Sparking Zero would have gotten way more new characters and free updates, although that hasn't been the case. But before we talk about the state of the game now, I want to preface this review by talking about why Sparking Zero is such a monumental game for Dragon Ball. So let's start with Sparking Zero. I've been watching Dragon Ball ever since I was in middle school, and since it's one of the most popular anime ever made, naturally there's a ton of video games based on it too. Though unlike most anime, there's actually quite a bit of genuinely good Dragon Ball games. My first Dragon Ball game was not one of them. Around the same time I started really getting into the show, which is also when Dragon Ball Z Kai was airing on Nickelodeon, a new Dragon Ball game was coming out very soon, Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Tenkaichi. Just saying that name now will make a lot of people watching this video realize why this was not a good Dragon Ball game to start with. The game is pretty infamous, but of course at the time, I had no idea. I was so blown away by the amazing graphics, which still look really good to this day, and the fact that it was the first ever Dragon Ball game to have a create a character system, so I didn't realize that the gameplay just revolved around what is essentially rock, paper, scissors. Although once I finally got the game, the sheer spectacle of the battles, as well as the new custom story, was enough to satisfy me for a while. Though it didn't really hit me how bad this game truly was until I actually started playing a good Dragon Ball Z game for the first time, and that was when I bought Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3 for the Nintendo Wii. When I discovered the Budokai Tenkaichi games, I thought that Ultimate Tenkaichi was a sequel to those games because of the title, but it turns out the game wasn't supposed to be called Ultimate Tenkaichi at all. In Japan, the game is called Ultimate Blast, but in America and Europe, the name was chosen based on a fan vote. The other options were Tenkaichi Z, Saiyan Rising, Awakening Saiyans, and Saiyan Warriors. So I guess Ultimate Tenkaichi won the fan vote, despite this game having almost nothing to do with the Tenkaichi series at all. I would say the Raging Blast games are definitely way more of a spiritual successor or sequel to the Tenkaichi series. But the reason I bring up this game at all is because the name Tenkaichi holds a lot of weight for Dragon Ball Z game fans, especially Budokai Tenkaichi 3. That game is one of the most beloved games in the entire franchise, and the fact that this game was called Ultimate Tenkaichi just rubbed a lot of fans the wrong way. And once I finally got to play a true Budokai Tenkaichi game, it made me understand why. So I guess that's one good thing to come out of Ultimate Tenkaichi. If I never played that game, I would have never gotten into Budokai Tenkaichi 3. A lot of people also love the Budokai games, which despite their names have nothing to do with Budokai Tenkaichi. Although I always tended to gravitate more towards 3D fighting games rather than 2D, at least back then. But although there were other 3D Dragon Ball games to choose from, Budokai Tenkaichi 3 caught my eye because it had the biggest roster of any Dragon Ball game at the time. Hell, it has one of the biggest rosters of any fighting game period. It has a whopping 162 characters. And as a big lover of OG Dragon Ball, I was very happy to see how many characters from that show represented. But it wasn't just quantity over quality, because I thought the gameplay was very enjoyable. And although the graphics, even for the time, weren't that great, I can excuse it for how much content is in this game. At the time, it was the closest a Dragon Ball game has come to making me feel like I was actually partaking in a Dragon Ball Z fight, especially since it had pretty much every stage and character I could ever want. There are a ton of characters that are playable in this game that are almost never playable in any other Dragon Ball game, like Grandpa Gohan, Arale, Emperor Pilaf, and of course, Devilman. Notice how they're all Dragon Ball characters, by the way. But of course, there are some more obscure Dragon Ball Z characters too, like Tapion, Dr. Wheelo, and the Frieza soldiers. But the game isn't just about playing the various fights from Dragon Ball Z, and Dragon Ball GT. Because one of my favorite aspects of this game are the what-if stories. My favorite was always the one where you play as Devilman and you use your Devil Might beam to destroy Frieza and his army. The game is just filled to the brim with fan service like that, like how you could play as the Grade 8 versions of all the Saiyans like Nappa and Raditz, even though they never appeared in the anime before. Plus every character gets a voice description from Chi-Chi, which I love. But it's also the little touches that make the game feel special too. Like how when you play as Piccolo in tournament mode, his name will change to Ma Jr. Plus androids can't charge their ki. Super Saiyan Goku Mid and Super Saiyan Goku Late have different styles of hair to reflect the different art style. And Super Saiyan 3 Goku has the only ultimate that can work against giant characters, since he uses the Dragon Fist to defeat Hirudegarn. Little touches like this are always nice, like the loading screen minigames. Those were always a staple of early Dragon Ball games, but now since loading screens are so fast, they don't really need them anymore. Though I remember when I first tried to buy this game, it was actually pretty hard to find. Even back in the early 2010s, only a few years after the game came out, the game was pretty obscure. I guess because Dragon Ball wasn't as big in America back then as it is now. Plus, it probably didn't help that it has a title that's pretty hard to pronounce. If it wasn't for Goku saying it on the Wii title screen, I definitely wouldn't have known how to pronounce it. I certainly had no idea what it meant. Though of course now I know that Tenkaichi Budokai is the name for the World Martial Arts Tournament, but that makes me wonder why the game is called Budokai Tenkaichi and not Tenkaichi Budokai. Well, much like how Ultimate Tenkaichi had a different title in Japan, Budokai Tenkaichi is called Dragon Ball Sparking, then the sequel is called Sparking Neo, and this third game is called Sparking Meteor, which is also why the newest game in the series is called Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. It's strange that in the West, we changed the title to make it even less Americanized, though apparently the reason they did this is because the Budokai games sold so well, they wanted these games to have a similar naming scheme, which would also explain why it's called Budokai Tenkaichi and not Tenkaichi Budokai, since Tenkaichi Budokai roughly translates to number one under the heavens, martial arts gathering, but when you switch the words around, it doesn't really mean anything. Now I know this isn't a review of Budokai Tenkaichi 3, but I'm just trying to show why this series is so important to me, because even though Budokai Tenkaichi 3 came out in 2007, there were really no other Dragon Ball games like it since. Not counting Tenkaichi Tag Team since that was only on the PSP, the closest we got were the Raging Blast games. Although those games did have some pretty cool characters in their roster, like Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta and Broly, and also Tarbell and Hachiyak, but it wasn't quite the same as the Tenkaichi games. There was also a game called Zenkai Battle Royale, but that was only in Japanese arcades. And since there hasn't been a Raging Blast game in over 15 years, the closest we've gotten in recent times are the Xenoverse games, though in order to have a roster that's comparable to the Tenkaichi games, you need to buy a shitload of DLC that costs even more than the base game. So for the 17 years since Budokai Tenkaichi 3 come out, the only way we could play a game that would satisfy our cravings was either to mod Xenoverse 2, or to play mods of the original Budokai Tenkaichi 3. One of the most popular ones was even called Budokai Tenkaichi 4, and it's a really well-made mod. Though seemingly out of nowhere, on March 5th, 2023, our prayers were finally being answered. No longer did we have to play mods and almost a decade's worth of Xenoverse 2 DLC to get our fix, because we got a glimpse at a brand new Dragon Ball game. But not just any game, it seemed we were finally getting Budokai Tenkaichi 4. I couldn't believe my eyes when I first saw this announcement. Pretty much everyone thought this series was dead, though unfortunately after this announcement, it would be a while before we got any official news on this game. Once we finally did get to see more of this game, I was happy with pretty much everything they were showing so far. First of all, the game was called Sparking Zero, and even though a lot of people were confused as to why it wasn't called Budokai Tenkaichi 3, I think it was a better choice to go with this name. But this also showed the game wasn't just another successor, it was a true honest-to-God sequel to the original games. The gameplay looked to be a perfect modernization of the Budokai Tenkaichi formula, plus the graphics and character models were some of the best we've seen in any Dragon Ball game, especially once the game got further along in development and we can see the tweaks to the models and animations they did to make them look even better. One of the reasons they look so good is because they're all based on Naohiro Shintani's designs, who was the lead animation director on Dragon Ball Super Broly. I especially love the way he uses color, like with Vegeta's darker blue tights and the different color transformations, plus the fiery auras and the wavy Super Saiyan hair look really good. Though there are some downsides to using his design, like Bardock's default outfit in the game is the one from the Broly movie, and Kid Goku has some undershirt that he never wears in the original manga. But the models all still look really great, and they look even better when paired with some beautiful character animation. A lot of people would complain in the old games that the animations weren't that great, plus they would reuse them a lot, as well as reusing other moves. And I mean, it makes sense since the game has so many characters it has to work with, but in this game they really went above and beyond to give every character unique animations and moves. Even transforming into a new form like Super Saiyan will give characters a completely new set of animations and moves. So everything I was seeing from this game so far from the trailers was all looking really promising, especially the gameplay. But the thing I was most worried about when it came to this game was the roster. I figured this game would at least have most of the characters from the Budokai Tenkaichi 3 roster, as well as all these new Dragon Ball Super characters that have been introduced since. And the character reveal trailers they would release before launch were the closest we've come to Smash Bros level of hype in a very long time. But with each trailer, I was just waiting for them to announce more Dragon Ball characters, and unfortunately the only one they announced was Kid Goku. Well, I guess in this game he's called Teen Goku, which is more accurate. So we got no Tao Pai Pai, Chi-Chi, Pilaf, Nam, Grandpa Gohan, not even Demon King Piccolo. We didn't even get Arale, even though she's also in Dragon Ball Super. But still, despite my problems with the lack of original Dragon Ball characters in this game, there's still 21 more characters in this game than there was in Budokai Tenkaichi 3, giving this game a whopping 182 characters. Although many people would complain there's too many Gokus in this game, but I don't really think that's the big issue here, because if Dragon Ball was the only series that got shafted in terms of the roster, there are still some notable characters absent from other series. Like for some reason they didn't include Super 17 or Nova Shenron from Dragon Ball GT. Plus with Dragon Ball Super there are characters like Jacko, Magetta, Otama, and the two other members of the Trio de Danger that aren't part of the roster, though I guess the latter are part of Bergamo's ultimate move. There are even some movie characters I'm surprised aren't in the roster, like Bass Garlic Jr., Paikon, Salza, and Zangia. Of course, I know it's kind of unrealistic to expect them to add some obscure characters like Devilman to this game, but I don't think asking for Demon King Piccolo is too much. Though at least Roshi, Tien, and Yamcha all have their OG Dragon Ball outfits, so that's something I guess. But I'm sure most people would rather have some of these characters I mentioned before than characters like Garlic Jr., Dr. Wheelo, or Metal Cooler. I always just found it strange how movie characters got more representation in these games than original Dragon Ball characters. And I'm not saying the game is bad just because it doesn't have every single character that I want, but it is extremely ludicrous that we don't even have a single OG Dragon Ball character that isn't Goku. Hell, Goku doesn't even get to transform into a Great Ape in this game. In fact, none of the Saiyans in this game have Great Ape transformations except for Vegeta. Not even Gohan or Bardock. And I'm not trying to say I don't like the roster either, that's not true at all. The roster is pretty great, but there are a lot of things that could have been improved besides just the characters themselves. Like, we could have gotten way more costumes and stages. Like, some characters in this game have accessories you can equip, like Roshi's glasses or a halo, and it would have been cool if more characters had accessories like this, but most of them don't. Though the game did have a special V-shaped aura you can equip, but it was only accessible to those who subscribed to V-Jump, and there was no other custom aura like this in the game at all. Oh, and that reminds me, I wish Mr. Satan had his jetpack in this game like in the old game. Plus, when it comes to costumes, I'm surprised we didn't get Gohan's Bojack outfit or Goku and Vegeta's winter coats from the Broly movie. Hell, we don't even have that stage from Broly in the game. When it comes to stages, the game is pretty lacking. I mean, there's only 12, and there are a lot of really iconic locations from the series that I'm surprised aren't in this game, like Kami's Lookout, Kame House, the Universe 6 tournament, and just a basic space map. Plus, of course, if there was more Dragon Ball representation, we would have got more cool maps like Muscle Tower, Central City, and Korin's Tower. Though to be fair, even though there are a few stages in this game, the level of detail in the destructibility and the environments is pretty impressive. Plus, almost every stage has different variants, like nighttime and sunset. But even though they made a big deal about movie characters being in the game, there aren't really any movie stages, like the Tree of Might or Hell. Plus, none of the movie characters have alternate costumes, like Broly doesn't get his Second Coming outfit, and Videl doesn't get her Say Woman outfit. They seem to not want to include too many non-canon things in this game, which I guess also explains why Bardock was designed the way he is. Not only that his default outfit is from Dragon Ball Super Broly, but also that he doesn't go Great Ape in this game, because he doesn't go Great Ape in that movie. So since Dragon Ball Minus and Dragon Ball Super Broly are the new canon for Bardock, they don't want to include things that aren't canon. So we also don't get Great Ape Raditz or Nappa, and we don't get characters like Pikkon either. But still, a lot had to be cut to accommodate for all these new Dragon Ball Super characters. Not only that, but we're still getting Dragon Ball Daima characters in the future. But for now, all we have in the base game is just Mini Goku. He can't even go Super Saiyan in this game, and he doesn't even use a Kamehameha. Plus, he doesn't have an English dub voice either. For some reason, he only talks with his Japanese voice. I guess because the English dub wasn't out yet by the time this game came out. Well, even though I thought the roster of stages and characters could have been improved, it doesn't ruin the whole game for me. In fact, I still like the character roster, and I think everything else in the game was done really well. I already talked about how great the graphics and animations are, but one thing I don't see people talk about as much is the music. I wouldn't say it's the best Dragon Ball game soundtrack ever made, but it still has quite a few good songs. Plus, it's not just the music that I like, but the sound design in general. Of course, that also includes the voice acting, and it's no surprise at this point that the Japanese cast is able to pull such great performances, even though this is like the 1000th time they've said some of these lines. But I also have to give props to the English cast for this game, because there are times when they record video game lines, it sounds like they're phoning it in. But for this game, it really feels like they're putting it 110%, especially James Marsters, who you can tell really loves playing Zamasu. Also, much like the old games, this game has plenty of fan service that'll make even the most die-hard Dragon Ball fan happy. In Vegeta's story, there's a part where you play a little rock, paper, scissors minigame, like when he's deciding if he or Goku gets to fight Boo. Zamasu also says a line that Piccolo says in the live-action Dragon Ball Evolution movie.
Human power has made before, as it will again now and die! Human power has failed before, as it will again!
And Yajirobe even makes a reference to Muscle Man from Regular Show.
You know who else can tussle with the great Yajirobe? My mom!
There's tons of unique dialogue in this game, but not just for when characters are facing off one-on-one. When you get a certain group of characters together for a team, they also have unique dialogue. Plus, they brought back the Chi-Chi descriptions for every character, but in this game she's joined by Bulma and Videl too. They even brought back the Yamcha Games tournament, but the different tournaments are just a fraction of some of the single-player content in this game. But once I finally got my hands on this game, before I started delving into the single-player content, I wanted to get a feel for the gameplay, and I was very delighted to see that once I started playing the game, all my muscle memory from the previous game started coming back to me. And even if you've never played those games before, this one's very easy to pick up and play for new players. They did a lot to ensure that not only the original Budokai Tenkaichi gameplay was kept as true to the original as possible, they also did a great job modernizing the controls and tweaking certain things that needed improvement. A lot of things you can do in the old games you can still do in this one, like bouncing ki blast back and forth like a volleyball, or using a solar flare to hide from your enemies since they're no longer locked onto you. Plus, I really like the way the solar flare animation looks in this game, and I feel it's also because the developers seem to actually listen to fans and feedback back. A perfect example of this is how they added split screen to the game, even though they weren't going to originally, because a lot of fans requested it. Although at first, the Hyperbolic Time Chamber was the only map that was playable with split screen, but then later they made it so you can play on any map. Although having split screen gameplay in a fighting game should be a no-brainer, unfortunately nowadays that's not really the case. Especially since it makes it much harder to optimize the game when you have two screens going on at once. Although if you don't have enough friends to play split screen with, then there's plenty of single player content to keep you entertained for hours. I talked before about how much I love the what if scenarios in Budokai Tenkaichi 3, and I was hoping we'd see something similar in this game, but I had no idea just how far they take this concept. So not only does this game have a pretty sizable single-player campaign with branching what-if paths depending on how you complete certain missions, they also made it so anyone can create their own what-if battles. That leads to this game having some of the most impressive single-player content I've ever seen in a fighting game. Well, at least for a 3D anime brawler, that is. Just beating Goku's story alone in the single player took me longer than most other fighting game single player campaigns. But after you beat his, there's still a story for Vegeta, Piccolo, Gohan, Trunks, Frieza, Jiren, and Goku Black for some reason. Some of them aren't very long though, but they all depict the various fights and arcs from the anime. But what makes this game's story mode special isn't just that you can see the different point of views of all these different characters during the story, because depending on certain actions you do during the fight, it can lead to a different branching path in the timeline that'll lead to a whole new story arc. Some could be as simple as Goku defeating Burter instead of Jace, which only changes who is with Captain Ginyu when he fights Goku, and others can be more complex, like Frieza recruiting other people to the Tournament of Power, like the Ginyu Force, his dad, or Cooler, which completely changes the entire arc. A perfect example of this is in the very beginning. You can make it so when Goku and Piccolo fight Raditz, he instead decides to bring Krillin, which completely changes the entire rest of the series. So he never trains with King Kai, but instead he trains with his friends, which leads to them being more prepared for the fight against the Saiyans, so Goku ends up becoming a Super Saiyan when he fights Vegeta. So I just think it's really cool how a lot of these branching paths lead to entirely new stories. One of my favorites though has to be the one where Zamasu takes over Gohan's body instead of Goku. So in this story we don't get Goku Black, but instead we get an entirely new character, Gohan Black. Although seeing Gohan Black is cool, I really wish he was playable in the game. Plus I wish we got more what-ifs that would create entirely new characters. Like what if we got one where Vegeta goes Super Saiyan 3, or one where Buu absorbs different characters. Though there is a what if where Vegeta in the Saiyan Saga goes Super Saiyan, so we get to see him in that outfit with Super Saiyan hair. There are a bunch of other really cool what ifs too, like the one where Trunks stays after the Goku Black arc and fights in the Tournament of Power, or the one where Roshi fights against Jiren like in the Dragon Ball Super manga. There's actually a few references to the Dragon Ball Super manga in this game. Like Vegeta can do the Gamma Burst Flash, and Goku Black even has some moves from the manga as well. I mean, the developers definitely know that fans want characters like Moro and Granola, but they just aren't allowed to add them to these games. But it would have been cool if we at least got Super Saiyan Goku Black. So not only is the campaign long because you're playing through all these story arcs as all these different characters, but also because each fight you partake in could easily branch off into an entirely new story. But not only is the story mode long, it gets pretty difficult at times too. This is one of the few Dragon Ball fighting games where I actually struggled to defeat Raditz, but that was just a taste of how difficult this game could be, because once you fight against Grade 8 Vegeta, the gloves are off. Fighting against giant-sized characters in general in this game can be pretty challenging, and oftentimes quite annoying. But those weren't the only fights that gave me trouble. Like there's one where you have to defeat Goku Black and Zamasu within a certain time period, but the game doesn't show you how much time you have left. But all I know is the window of time you have to complete this mission is pretty short. And there's also one where you have to defeat the entire Ginyu Force, and it gets pretty difficult defeating 5 enemies as one character while trying not to die. There's also another mission that annoyed me where you have to defeat Frieza with the Spirit Bomb, but I think the worst is one in Goku Black's story where you have to let Trunks kill you with his ultimate. Not only is it annoying having to wait for Trunks to use his ultimate against you without killing you first, but I also don't like missions where you have to win by losing. It's even worse than that trope where you kick an enemy's ass in a video game, but then in the cutscene they kick your ass. Oh yeah, another neat thing you can do in the story mode is switch to first person mode during cutscenes. It's honestly pretty useless, but sometimes it leads to some funny moments. So overall, despite some annoying missions and some wasted potential here and there, I really enjoyed the story mode for this game. But a part of me is kinda glad the game gets pretty difficult early on, because it really forces you to get good at the game. I'm certainly no pro at this game or anything, and I wasn't in the old games either, but I feel like this game is much more advanced than your average 3D fighter. One of the most important things I learned when trying to get good at this game is you really have to get good at timing, especially when it comes to vanish countering. When the game first came out, if you timed it right, then a lot of fights would just evolve into both opponents vanish countering each other over and over until one finally messed up. But they've since updated it so now the room for error gets smaller and smaller the longer it goes on, since this was especially a problem when playing online. And speaking of online, a 3D anime fighter like this, with this many characters, is just inherently going to be unbalanced. And I don't think that's a bad thing. This game is just more casual than something like Fighter Z, and the unbalanced nature of it just adds to the fun. It's why I love Marvel vs. Capcom 2 so much. But when playing online, the game is dominated by just a few of the top tier characters, and those are usually the strongest characters in the anime. People like Gogeta Blue, Vegito Blue, Whis, and Ultra Instinct Goku, especially since the latter two have auto dodge, which is really OP in this game. I'm personally a Gogeta Blue main, but I'm not very good at playing online. But the unbalanced nature of the game also makes it more fun when playing as characters like Mr. Satan and trying to win fights online as a gag character. It makes me miss the early days of this game when Yajirobe's Sensu Bean heal was insanely broken. But there were also some moves that are pretty useless, mainly the rapid-fire key moves. They almost never hit their targets, and Piccolo's Hellzone grenade in the old games used to have a similar problem, because sometimes the key would hit the ground, but in this game the Hellzone grenade is a cutscene, so that isn't a problem anymore. As you play through the story mode, you unlock new characters, and you can also buy characters, items, and other things in the shop. Getting money isn't too hard, but you can also use the Dragon Balls to wish for certain things, and getting the Dragon Balls is pretty annoying. Trying to find all 7 is almost entirely random, you just have to get lucky pretty much. But as you keep playing through the game, your player level will go up, but for some reason the level caps at 20, and I reached that cap before I even beat the campaign. But even if after you beat the story mode you still want more what-if battles, there's pretty much an infinite amount of them to keep you satisfied, and that's because anybody can create their own what-if battles and upload them online for anyone to enjoy. I made one where Chaozu becomes a god of destruction and the only person strong enough to stop him is Yajirobe, though I wish I could say I had fun making this custom battle, but unfortunately, it was pretty tedious and annoying. Even doing something as basic as selecting a character's name for the dialogue was an extremely tedious process because there's no easy way to search for what you want, and the filters aren't much help, so I had to scroll through pretty much every single option until I found the one I wanted. And when scrolling through the list of characters, it's not just characters that are in the game, but almost every character from the Dragon Ball franchise, so the list can be pretty extensive. It made this process a lot longer and harder than it needed to be, and I'm definitely never going to create another custom what if ever again. But that doesn't mean it's any less fun playing other people's custom fights. And there are some pretty cool ones that fans have made, plus there are official ones that were made by the developers, and some of them are actually really hard, some of the hardest fights in the game even. Now I assume that by the time Dragon Ball Daima was finished, this game would have had a lot more updates and DLC in the meantime. This game's been out for a while now, and the developers have been pretty slow to roll out updates. I mean, we only really got one substantial update since launch, and one DLC drop. I know there's more Daima DLC coming, but I wish we got more free updates too. But still, even if we didn't get any new updates since, it doesn't change the fact that this game is really fun, and I think it lived up to the many years that fans have been waiting for a new entry in this series. Of course it's not perfect, but I think the good here greatly outweighs all the bad. It brought me back to a time where I played Budokai Tenkaichi 3 religiously as a kid, and I think that's the greatest praise a game like this could ever receive. I can tell this game was made with a lot of care and passion, and it really shows in the final product. I think it's a game that came out at just the right time when Dragon Ball fans really needed it, and I'm not just saying that because it came out after Toriyama's passing, but also because it came out a week before Dragon Ball Daima. Both of the things I'm reviewing here today were things that fans have been waiting for many years, but when it comes to the anime, it definitely wasn't what most people were expecting. I mean, my feelings towards Dragon Ball Daima have been sort of an emotional roller coaster. At first I was really excited to get a new Dragon Ball anime, but then I was disappointed when I found out the premise was them being turned into children. But I started to get more enthusiastic again once I saw how good the animation was, which only increased further once I finally sat down and watched the show. But now that the show is finally over, I think my feelings are a bit more mixed than they were before. But even before the show finally came out, it was already a bit of a roller coaster. For those of you that don't remember, or maybe weren't around when this was going on, let's go back to 2018, when the Tournament of Power arc in Dragon Ball Super was coming to a close. For a majority of that arc, we had no idea this would be the final arc of Dragon Ball Super, because we didn't really find out till the very end, so it all felt a bit abrupt, which led to a lot of people assuming at the time that it wasn't actually the end of Dragon Ball Super, but rather a prolonged break because they were about to release a new movie, Dragon Ball Super Broly. I mean, the One Piece anime just recently did something very similar, and it was to ensure that the animation quality would keep getting better. But then years kept going by, and we still got no news of a continuation of Dragon Ball Super. The fandom pretty much went through all the 5 stages of grief. First, they were in denial that the show wasn't coming back. Then that turned to anger because it was taking so long for any news. Then we reached the bargaining stage where people thought that if they begged Toei Animation or maybe bought more products, they would realize that the show was profitable enough to keep going. Then of course there was the depression stage, and then finally acceptance. Though many fans never reached that final stage, I quickly realized that we were never getting a new Dragon Ball Super anime, and if we were to get a new anime in the future, it would probably be something completely different. I just remember the insane levels of cope people had when it came to the show coming back. A lot of people thought that since there was a new Gegege no Kitaro anime taking up the Dragon Ball Super time slot, that once that show ended, Dragon Ball Super would finally come back. Then people also said it was taking a break because Toei wanted to focus on One Piece and Dragon Ball Super's quality animation, but then they would bring the animation team back for Dragon Ball Super when the time was right. People also said that the whole reason Dragon Ball Super Hero was 3D and not 2D was because they wanted the 2D staff to focus on a new Dragon Ball anime. Then there were also people that said that they were just waiting for the manga to get more material for them to animate, even though the anime never based its material on the Dragon Ball Super manga. But for a lot of fans, the manga was the only way to continue the Dragon Ball Super story. After the Tournament Tournament of Power arc ended in the Dragon Ball Super manga, it got 2 more original arcs with new villains and characters, and many people have been begging Toei to animate these arcs for years now. But the problem is, unlike the regular Dragon Ball anime, Dragon Ball Super's anime and manga have been 2 separate entities for the entire time. Both mediums are based on Toriyama's outline for the story, but for the manga, Toyotaro is able to take a lot more liberties with how he handles it. But for the anime, they both work with Toei Animation to create what is considered the canon story. This is also why all the manga arcs differ greatly from the anime. So even if we were to see the Moro and Granola arcs in anime form, they'd probably be very different from the manga. Though if Dragon Ball Super never ended, I bet a lot of people wouldn't even have read the manga, so it really worked in boosting its sales. But what makes matters worse for a lot of fans is that most of the material from the Dragon Ball Super manga isn't used in any material outside of the manga. Like, none of these new characters are playable in video games, and we don't have any figures of Moro or Ultra Ego Vegeta. But nowadays in the manga, the much anticipated Black Frieza arc has been put on hold for 3 years because Toyotaro had to retell Dragon Ball Super Hero, and has also been doing these arcs with Goten and Trunks in high school. Though to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of Dragon Ball Super's manga, so I honestly wouldn't really care that much if we never got to see it animated ever. Even though we went almost 7 years with no new Dragon Ball show, the rumors were still spreading like wildfire since the day Super ended. People were convinced that Toei was working in secret on the next big thing. Some were saying it was a new season of Dragon Ball Super, some called it Dragon Ball Super 2, and some said it would be a new show entirely. Even though of course we ended up getting a new Dragon Ball show, we now know that the show wasn't in production until after Dragon Ball Super Hero came out, so all the rumors that spread before then were all just lies. There were a lot of Dragon Ball YouTubers who claimed to have some insider info on the new Dragon Ball anime, and a lot of them said that they were working on Dragon Ball Super 2. And even though they knew they were full of crap, they probably figured that it was inevitable that we'd get a new Dragon Ball show eventually, so at some point they could say that they're right, even though Dragon Ball Super 2 was never in production. And that's pretty much what happened when the Dragon Ball Daima leak started spreading, because all these YouTubers who claimed that Dragon Ball Super 2 was happening started changing their tune and saying that it was actually Dragon Ball Daima the whole time. And they would even leak and spoil critical details about this show just so they could say that they're not liars. This is pretty much how the Dragon Ball news cycle was for years, until we finally ended up getting real leaks for the next Dragon Ball show. After years of rumors and speculation, the entire premise of the show got leaked just weeks before it was meant to be revealed. And I don't think any Dragon Ball fan expected the next Dragon Ball anime to be like this. The story was that Goku and all of his friends got turned into kids, so he had to team up with Supreme Kai to go into the demon realm to stop the demon who did this to them and collect the Dragon Balls. The rumors said that this was going to be a web anime, and the title was called Dragon Ball Magic. So since it was intended to be a web anime, it wasn't supposed to air on TV at all. It was going to be exclusive to streaming. But once Toriyama got involved with this anime, the scope got much larger. Much like the movie Battle of Gods, this was something the staff was already working on for a while, but then when they showed it to Toriyama, he was so enthusiastic about it that he wanted to work on it as well. But since they started working on it after Dragon Ball Super Hero finished production, that means they had years to work on this show, so unlike Dragon Ball Super, the show would have a much healthier schedule. So that means more time to work on the story, and of course, more time to make the animation look as good as it can. Even though I wasn't a fan of the premise, to the point where I was honestly hoping that the leaks were fake, it was cool that we were getting a completely original story with no time restraints in a brand new setting with Toriyama at the helm. But the team may have gotten a little too excited since now we know that they started animating the show before they even finished writing the story. Well, not too long after the show was leaked, we got our first true reveal at New York Comic Con in October of 2023. I even went to Comic Con that year, but unfortunately I wasn't able to attend the Dragon Ball panel. But when they finally showed the first trailer for this show, not only did we realize that the leaks were all true, but the show was now called Dragon Ball Daima. For most of the show's production, the show was called Dragon Ball Magic, but right before they revealed it at Comic-Con, they decided to change it to Dragon Ball Daima. I'm not really sure why they changed it, and I'm not even quite sure what Daima even means, but according to Toriyama himself, it's a made-up term that just means something like evil, or perhaps great demon. That's not even the only thing that was changed, because little did we know, some of the footage that was shown at Comic-Con, particularly the fight between Goku and Vegeta, is almost completely different in the final show because that animation was made years before the show was released as a sort of pitch. A lot of things about the show in general were changed once Toriyama became involved. Originally his role was meant to be similar to how it was when he was making Dragon Ball Super, where he would just approve things here and there, or maybe design a character or two with some rough plot outlines. But Toriyama got so enthusiastic about this show that he decided to become more involved with this than any other Dragon Ball anime product. Toriyama being this heavily involved made the staff really excited too, and like I said before, they got so excited they started animating before the story was even fully completed, but they claim they did that in order to make it similar to how a weekly manga is made. But if you know anything about the horrible conditions shonen mangaka go through, then you probably know how bad of an idea this sounds. But at least it gave the animators a few years to work on this show, rather than just a few months like with Dragon Ball Super. But before the show came out, there was yet another major leak. But this one was for the English dub of the show. It was leaked early that Stephanie Nadolny was going to reprise her role as Kid Goku for the first time in 20 years. For people like myself that grew up with the original dub of Dragon Ball, they're most familiar with Stephanie Nadolny's portrayal of Kid Goku rather than Colleen Clickenbeard, who replaced her when they made Dragon Ball Z Kai. So it was a pretty big deal because a lot of people were really attached to her performance as Goku and Gohan. And since this show was turning Goku into a kid again, it was the perfect time to bring her back. I was just glad that since the dub was being announced early, that means we wouldn't have to wait years for an English dub like with Dragon Ball Super. And the first few episodes were even getting a theatrical release. But before we talk about the dub, let's go back to the announcement of the show itself, because many fans, including myself, were not happy. Although of course my reaction was not nearly as strong as some other fans.
Please don't be magic. Please don't be magic. Please don't be magic. Don't give us this! We don't want this! This looks cool though! Nobody asked for this! We just wanted Moro!
A lot of people were really angry that the show seemed to be taking a more child-friendly approach, and of course that it wasn't a continuation of Dragon Ball Super. My reaction was more so disappointment, mainly because I was concerned with how nostalgia-pandery the show was going to be. Mind you, this is the second time Goku's been turned into a kid, and I figured the only reason they did that and give him the power pole was so that they can desperately try to harken back to the good old days of original Dragon Ball. Of course the animation did look beautiful, and I was excited to see more of the Demon Realm, but I wasn't sure how well Shin would mesh with Goku as his main companion. I was hoping we'd give other side characters the chance to shine. Plus, I was concerned if the new characters would be any good. But then everything changed on March 1st, 2024 when Akira Toriyama suddenly passed away. His death was not only hard for Dragon Ball fans, but for people around the world. And when I say it changed everything, I'm not just talking about the fandom itself, but the production of Dragon Ball Daima was even affected by it. The studio decided to scrap whatever plans they had for the Dragon Ball Daima opening and create a brand new one. They wanted to make a new theme song that would pay tribute to the man himself, but they only had a few months to do so. With such short notice, it was probably difficult to find someone who was up to the task, but they really lucked out when acclaimed music producer Zed decided to compose the song, while C&K would perform the vocals. But due to the tight deadline, Zed decided to use a song he had already composed for the opening. The song is called Out of Time, and if you listen to that song, you'll see that it's pretty much identical to the Dragon Ball Daima opening. He said before that that song is one of the greatest things he's ever composed, and it's fitting since he's a big fan of Dragon Ball, so he knew just how important this task was for him. Luckily, this whole ordeal didn't end up turning into a disaster, because I think this song is one of the greatest openings in all of Dragon Ball, maybe even all of anime. The song itself is great, the visuals are beautiful, and the lyrics pay tribute to Akira Toriyama in a really cool way. But you should check out Totally Not Mark's video, where T. Helms goes into more detail on this subject than I ever could. I would also say check out Anime AJ's videos on Dragon Ball Daima, but unfortunately Toei took them down, which is also a factor in why I'm not using much Daima footage in this video. But also when I said everything changed after Toriyama's death, I'm also talking about my perception of the show. I started out not really caring much about this show. I mean, I was going to watch it no matter what, but I wasn't really that enthusiastic about it. But now that Toriyama is dead and Dragon Ball Daima is his last project, it really changed how I viewed the show since I was thinking about it the whole time I was watching it. And I assume the same could be said for many other fans as well. Once the show finally came out, I was relieved to see that my worries were quickly fading away. One of my biggest concerns about this show was that it was going to be nostalgia pandering just for the sake of it, but this show isn't just trying to remind you about the good old days, it's a tribute to pretty much everything Dragon Ball. It's like if you took all the aspects of Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, and Dragon Ball Super and put them in a blender, and a show like that being Akira Toriyama's final Dragon Ball project really is poetic. At least it wasn't something like Resurrection F, and it was clear from the get-go they really wanted the show to succeed, not just with the fans, but they wanted to bring in a whole new audience too. I mean, as far as anime goes, Dragon Ball is probably the biggest worldwide phenomena of them all, yet despite how much more marketing this got than Dragon Ball Super ever did, it just didn't reach the same audience. Granted, it took years for Dragon Ball Super to get to the point where it was crashing websites from just how hyped people were for new episodes, but with how Dragon Ball Daima seemed like just a short filler side quest, many people, even lifelong fans, were more apprehensive towards it. A lot of that probably boils down to the premise, but it also didn't help that here in America, it took months for the English dub to finally come out, and by the time the English dub did come out, it barely received any marketing at all. Nowadays, having a simuldub for an anime as big as this is pretty much the standard, and more so than any other anime, Dragon Ball fans tend to prefer the dub over the sub. I mean, especially since the show was finished for a while, they could have easily given this one a simuldub. I mean, even Dr. Stone has one, but I thought once the English dub got further into the show, it would gain more traction. But even Super Saiyan 4 didn't help with that. Of course, the die-hard Dragon Ball fans were all watching it, but the show never received even close to the levels of hype that Dragon Ball Super got, even though this show had way better marketing than Super, although I guess that's not saying much since Super had basically nothing. They definitely could have done a better job pushing this on social media, especially once they realized this was going to be Toriyama's last project. The same thing happened when the Sandland anime came out, although that one was Disney Plus and Hulu exclusive, whereas this one is on those platforms as well as Netflix and Crunchyroll. But I guess even if they did market the show a lot better, it wouldn't change the fact that no matter what, a show like Dragon Ball Super 2 would always receive a lot more hype than something like this. Though of course popularity has no bearing on a show's actual quality, and quality is definitely the word I would use to describe this show's animation. They got tons of series veterans and hot new talent alike to work on this show. Plus that, on top of the fact that the show actually has a healthy work schedule, leads to a show with animation that actually rivals the theatrically released films. I would even go as far to say it surpasses a lot of the animation in Broly, but great animation can only get you so far if the writing, story, and characters all don't work. And that was really the number one thing I was worried about with this show. The pacing for this show is pretty weird. It starts off kinda slow, but then halfway through it picks up really quickly. They don't even turn into kids until the very end of the first episode. A majority of it is spent recapping the Buu saga. Granted, the animation for these segments is really great, and it makes me wish we got a Dragon Ball remake one day, and I assume these segments are only here to bring people up to speed who have never seen Dragon Ball Z before. But during these segments we also learn a lot about the Demon Realm. The biggest thing we learn is that Namekians actually came from the Demon Realm originally, so I guess when King Piccolo called himself a Demon King, he wasn't really lying. But this is also something that was hinted at in the Dragon Ball Super manga. We also learn a lot about the Demon King hierarchy. Like before Dabura, the Demon King was his father, Abra, but now the Demon King is a little guy called Goma, and Degasu and Arinsu, who are both the same race as Shin, are working for him. I assume this trio would have a very Pilaf gang vibe, but they're actually quite distinct, especially Arinsu. It's clear from the get-go that she has ulterior motives and is probably going to double-cross Goma, but we don't know what those plans are yet. Also in classic Dragon Ball fashion, now that we're getting a lot more information, we're also getting a lot of retcons with it. Like Goku says that Saiyans get a growth spurt at 15 years old, which makes sense I guess when you look at Kid Goku, but this is just their way of explaining why Goten and Trunks suddenly go from looking like children to teenagers, even though this growth spurt never happens to Gohan. Also, Goma only gets to use one wish with the Dragon Balls, because Shenron says people who are unfamiliar to him don't get to use more than one. I guess that would explain why Chi-Lai only gets one wish in the Broly movie. They also unretconned a previous retcon. They specified that the reason why Goku and Vegeta defused when they were fighting against Buu as Vegito was because the magical gases within Buu made them separate. So they used Buu to make Shin and Kibito separate instead of the Dragon Balls. So right from the get-go, this show already contradicts Dragon Ball Super, and if it wasn't already obvious from then that this show wasn't canon, the show made it much more apparent later on. Not that it being canon really matters in the grand scheme of things, but I still see people arguing about it to this day. All that really matters is whether or not the show is any good. And although just from the first episode it's too early to tell, one thing I did notice is that on top of having really good animation, this show has really impressive storyboards. It's way more dynamic and interesting to look at compared to most Dragon Ball Super episodes. It goes a long way in making the show look as good as it does, even in the scenes that aren't very action heavy. But of course the action heavy scenes are especially impressive, and in the first episode we get a pretty great Goku and Vegeta fight. Even though we've seen Goku and Vegeta fight countless times at this point, I never get tired of seeing them duking it out. But it's not just because the animation looks so good, I'm also a big fan of the character designs in this show, especially Goku's new outfit. But their fight is unfortunately cut short when they're all turned into children. But in Goma's wish, he specifies that everyone turns into first graders, and the people who are already young get turned into babies. But I don't get why this turns Dende into a baby even though he's already much older than a first grader. Plus when Goten and Trunks get turned into babies, it doesn't change their brains, it just changes their body. So everyone in the cast still has the same brain as if they were adults. But for some reason Dende acts like a baby. But Goma also specifies that everyone who is friends with the people who defeated Buu get turned into children, which is why people like Ox King and Roshi also get affected by the wish. But if all of Goku's friends have been turned into children, does that mean somewhere out there Upa, Suno, and Android 8 are all turned into children as well? Well, maybe not, because for whatever reason Korin hasn't changed at all. Maybe Goku only considers him a master and not a friend. But hell, even Mr. Popo gets turned into a kid. And this leads to the biggest reveal in all of Dragon Ball, that under Mr. Popo's turban he actually has horns. But besides that, I'm not really a fan of the way most of these characters look as children. For a lot of them, we know what they're supposed to look like at this age, yet they all just look like their adult forms, but smaller. Like here, Krillin doesn't look like how he did when he was a kid, he just looks like a chibi version of him as an adult. There were also some major characters that just never appear in the show, like Tien, Chaozu, and Gohan. They're all in the intro, yet Ox King and Yamcha get more screen time than they do. I was also hoping Buu being turned into a kid would make him look like Kid Buu, but instead he just looks like a small version of Fat Buu. But I think Piccolo is the most egregious example of this, since he fought Goku in the tournament when he was 5 years old, so really he should just be completely unchanged. I also mentioned before that even though they're turned into children, their brains are pretty much unchanged. Yet despite that, Dende still acts like a baby, and Goku acts way more childlike than he ever did as an adult, but I don't think that has anything to do with Goma's wish. That's just how they've been writing Goku ever since Dragon Ball Super. To be honest, even after finishing this show, I'm not a big fan of them using this plot device again of turning Goku into a child. Even though now it's not just Goku, it's everybody. But I do like it as a way to justify the cast being nerfed and for Goku to use the power pole again. Although their power levels being nerfed due to their age is something that's thrown completely out the window halfway through the show. Since Goku is much smaller now, his punches and kicks don't have as much range, so he uses the power pole to compensate for that. And I like the gag that Roshi's been using the power pole as a rack for drying his clothes all these years. But if Goku needed time to get used to his body, why didn't he just go in the hyperbolic time chamber? Well, now that the cast has all been turned into children and Goma has kidnapped Dende, we can finally get into the real plot of this show, even though we're already 3 episodes deep. A new character from the Demon Realm named Glorio arrives, and he brings Shin and Goku back with him. But Vegeta, Bulma, Piccolo, and Kibito have to stay behind while Bulma fixes the ship to bring them there. At least this gives Bulma something to do in this show, and the ship that she's fixing is actually the one that Shin used to get to this universe. And once the characters were all in the Demon Realm, we get even more lore dumps and world building. First, we learn that all Majin have pointed ears, which leads to a scene where Shin has to magically give Goku pointy ears in order for them to access the Demon Realm, which was kind of unsettling to see. We also learned that the Kais are all a race called Glind. They are genderless and they're born from fruit from the world tree. I think this is cool because it's something Toriyama has said many years ago, and now it's incorporated into the actual canon of the show. Plus, because of this, we learn that Shin's real name is actually Nahare, and most of his race left the Demon Realm when Buu was rampaging about. But the Namekians all left for different reasons. They were basically treated as slaves, mainly because they can make Dragon Balls, but they all managed to leave the Demon Realm and live on a new planet. It seems the Namekians and the Glind are more similar than we thought, so not only can they survive only on water, but they don't reproduce sexually either. But the Demon Realm has its own set of Dragon Balls created by a Namekian named Neva, and these Dragon Balls only come in a set of 3 instead of 7. And these balls are each guarded by a powerful robot called a Tamagami. And since the Demon Realm is split into 3 separate sections, each one has its own Tamagami. The only way to go in and out of each of the 3 realms is to go through this giant robot fish-looking thing called Warp Sama, and I thought it was funny they had to input a 4-digit password in order to get through. Though apparently this creature can also be turned off and on with a simple lever in the Demon King's castle. Each realm is essentially separated by class and how dangerous they are, so the 3rd Demon Realm, which is the first one they go into, is the poorest and also the least dangerous. And the 1st Demon Realm is the most dangerous, and it's where the Demon King resides. Although this show doesn't really do a good job of showing why the 1st Demon Realm is so dangerous. The whole structure of this show is sort of like a JRPG. They get new party members and get stronger as the show goes on, and then every time they defeat a boss, they unlock a new part of the map. They also buy items from a shop that'll help them on their journey. They all seem to come in the form of bugs, like they buy revive bugs that essentially act like sensu beans, and there's also fusion bugs that allow anyone to fuse together. I can't wait to see them use that in this show. Throughout each episode, we get more information about the Demon Realm and how the world works. It's almost very un-Dragon Ball-like how much lore dumps and world building we get in this show. Like, one cool bit of world building we get is that in the 3rd Demon Realm, the air is so heavy that it even makes flying difficult. This helps really make the Demon Realm feel like another world, and it also helps the characters feel even more nerfed with their younger bodies. But this really stops being an issue very quickly. Plus, I was hoping that since Goku struggles to fly in this world, that he would use the Nimbus like he does in the opening, but the Nimbus is nowhere to be found in this show at all, though I guess it's also easier to have them all flying together in one ship. But throughout the course of this show, they go through like 5 ships because they keep getting destroyed or stolen. If it happened once or twice, that'd be one thing, but it's ridiculous how many times they need to get a new ship in this show. But along the way, they meet another new demon character to join their party, a girl named Pansy who ends up being a princess of the 3rd Demon Realm. Not only that, but she's a brave freedom fighter and a resourceful mechanic. Her attitude also reminds me a lot of Pan. She's essentially this show's version of her, plus her name is even similar, though thankfully she's a much better character than Pan ever was in GT. I thought it was interesting that she said that Dabra was a bad leader. What exactly made him a bad leader? Was he too evil or something? Though I guess Goma's an even worse leader, because the reason why Pansy's a freedom fighter is because most of the citizens of the 3rd Demon Realm have collars around their necks. They use them to control and keep watch over the citizens, and even steal their lifespans. Pansy even has one despite being a princess. They're also unable to take them off because they're made out of Kachinite, which is the strongest material in the world, and basically indestructible. It's a material we've seen before in Dragon Ball, but now we know it comes from the planet Kaishin, which is where the Glinds are from. The collars were actually invented by Arinsu so she could prevent the citizens from rising up against her regime. But once Shin is easily able to remove Pansy's collar, they never become a relevant plot point ever again. But now that Pansy's been freed, she takes him to her father, the king of the 3rd Demon Realm, and it's here that we learn that he's the one who sent Glorio to find the one who defeated Majin Buu. But Glorio isn't just working for him, he's actually been working for Arinsu this whole time, who we now know is actually Shin's sister, and Degasu is his brother, though of course they're not siblings by blood. Glinds are only related if they come from the same world tree, which there are only 5 of on their planet. Though of course when King Kaidan wanted to see the one who defeated Buu, he wasn't expecting him to be a child. So in order to prove he's actually as strong as he says he is, he challenges him to fight his strongest warriors. Even though Goku is just fighting against a bunch of fodder soldiers, this is the first time he goes Super Saiyan in this show. I actually wish this wasn't the first time he went Super Saiyan in this show, because in the next episode when he fights against Glorio, he does it again, and I think it would have been much cooler if this was the first time he did it. Goku and Glorio's fight is actually really sick, though for whatever reason this is one of the only times we ever see Glorio fight without his gun. They say there's different kinds of magic, and it's cool we see Glorio use magic against Goku, but we don't really get to see any of the other demon characters using magic that much. Maybe that's why they decided not to call this show Dragon Ball Magic. After 8 episodes, we finally got our first Tamagami fight, and at first I thought it was really slow paced because of this, but after this the show's pacing gets much faster, and it makes me wish the later episodes took their time like the older ones did. The inconsistent pacing was probably due to the fact that the show was written as it was being animated, So the earlier episodes were probably mapped out much better, but once they got deeper into the story, you could tell they really started to fly by the seat of their pants more. But still, this first Tamagami fight is probably the best fight in the whole show. This fight really gave me everything I hoped for in this show, because they use Goku's small body both to his advantage and his disadvantage. Like, since the Tamagami is so much bigger than him, I like that he's forced to use his power pole for most of the fight, and he really does use it in a lot of creative ways here. Plus I love that shot where he gets hit by the hammer, and you can see him riding on it as the Tamagami swings it around. Everything from the animation and the choreography were all done beautifully here, plus the Tamagami itself is actually a pretty fun character. At first I was worried all the Tamagami would just be bland, boring robots, and although unfortunately that is the case for the other two, this one seems to have a more distinct personality. While this is going on, Arinsu is hatching up her own scheme. We see much more of her than Goma in these episodes, which is kind of strange since Goma is the main villain of this show. She meets up with an old witch named Marba, who not only was the one who created the Cybermen and sold them to Saiyans, but she also the one who apparently created Majin Buu. I'm not really a fan of the retcon that she created Buu and not Bibbidi, but the Cybermen coming from the Demon Realm is actually kind of interesting. Not only that, but Arinsu uses Cybermen and Buu DNA to create a brand new Majin Buu. Apparently she was there when Majin Buu was blown up by Majin Vegeta, and she takes some of that Buu goo and mixes it with Cybermen and her own DNA to create Majin Ku. The whole reason she created him is because she wanted him to defeat the first Tamagami and get the Dragon Ball before Goku and his friends do. The only problem is, despite having Buu and Cybermen DNA, he's not really much of a fighter. He's more brains than brawn, and he actually loves to sing too, but at least he's very loyal to Arinsu. So Arinsu then creates another Majin Buu, but this time using even more Buu DNA to make him a stronger fighter, and this one is called Majin Du. At first I wasn't sure how I felt about Majin Ku and Du, but I really like their dynamic together, and I like that they use their brains and their brawn to defeat the Tamagami. But now Arinsu has the third Dragon Ball, and Goku and the gang are about to get the second one. Once they all get to the second Demon Realm, they pretty much immediately fight the next Tamagami, but before the fight they meet up with Vegeta's group with the help of the best character in the whole show, Hybis. Words cannot express how much I love this character. He's definitely the best character in this entire show. Every time he's on screen, he's always hilarious. But once they all meet up, they have to split up immediately anyway because they can't all fit on the same plane. And once they finally fight the Tamagami, it's Vegeta who gets his time to shine instead of Goku. And since he's my favorite character, I'm completely okay with that, especially since during this fight he gets to go Super Saiyan 3 for the first time. Although I'm not a big fan of the way his hair looks, and this fight isn't nearly as good as the other Tamagami fight, it is still really cool seeing him use this form. But once they defeat the Tamagami, their adventure in the second Demon Realm isn't over yet, because now they go to the planet where Namekians originated from, which is where they meet Neva. We get a huge lore dump on the Namekians here, and I assumed at this point this would become where Piccolo starts to be more relevant in this show, but unfortunately after this, he has pretty much nothing to do. I think the only reason he's there is because he's one of Toriyama's favorite characters. Though I did really like this episode, and the one where they go to the planet full of giants. But once they start to leave the second Demon Realm, that's when the cracks on this show really start to form. The episode where Neva breaks the shield is one of the worst episodes in the entire show, and then once they get to the first Demon Realm, there's a lot of really bad scenes of them fighting enemy fodder that go on for way too long. Although the tanks they use in those scenes do remind me of the ones from Sandland. Plus, we also get introduced to some new Ginyu Force knockoff that aren't really interesting and serve zero purpose to the entire story. I really have no idea why they added these characters. Once they get to the castle, they easily defeat them, and they easily beat Degasu as well, which makes him also feel pointless because his defeat amounts to pretty much nothing. We don't learn anything new about him, we don't have an interaction with him and Shin, and we don't learn why he wanted to betray Goma. At least the scene with the girl getting the eye from Hybis was pretty funny, and he even got a cool hat out of it. Although the pacing is starting to feel really bad and the episodes aren't as good as the earlier ones, it really picks up once Goma gets the third eye. Although it is funny that Hybis had it on his belt the whole time, I really don't like in Dragon Ball when characters turn giant. The fights are usually never as interesting as the ones where they fight against normal-sized people, especially since Goma can just regenerate infinitely. I would have been more fine with it if we got to see Goma fight before turning into a giant, because they keep saying he's really powerful, but we never get to see that before he uses the third eye. But despite that, I thought it was really cool seeing all the characters work together to try to bring him down. Even the Tamagami joins in on the fight, but like I said, Goma can regenerate infinitely, so despite being much weaker than all of them combined, they're still not able to defeat him. So this leads to probably the biggest moment in the entire show, the moment Goku becomes a Super Saiyan 4. It would have been cool if this moment came as a surprise, but unfortunately the Dragon Ball Daima Twitter had to tweet a picture of it right when the episode came out in Japan, so the first thing I saw when I woke up in the morning was a picture of Super Saiyan 4, before I even had a chance to watch the episode. And I didn't even follow their account on Twitter. But even if it was a surprise, I probably still would have been annoyed at how Goku gets the form. Although I was never a big fan of how Goku and Vegeta achieved this form in Dragon Ball GT, at least the Golden Great Ape was cool. But here Neva just gives it to him by doing some sort of magic that's never explained. Although we do find out later that Goku was training to use this form for a while now, it doesn't really make it any better. So I would say Goku's Super Saiyan 4 transformation in GT was a lot better. Plus it was a nice moment when Pan has to calm him down when he's a Great Ape in order for him to achieve the form. Though it never really sat right with me that the form was even called Super Saiyan 4 to begin with, because you don't need Super Saiyan 2 and 3 to achieve this level. You just need to be able to go Super Saiyan while becoming a Zaru. I think in Daima it would have been better if Goku was trying to achieve this form, but couldn't because he didn't have a tail, and all Neva did was give him a tail with his magic. But here they don't really explain why Goku grows a tail when he achieves this form, but at least unlike GT it doesn't turn him into an adult for no reason. So at least it's cool that we get to see Goku use this form as both a kid and an adult. And as for which design I prefer, GT or Daima, I think it's a really tough decision. On the one hand, I like the colors they use in GT Super Saiyan 4, with the red fur with black hair, though I also really like the colors Daima uses for its Super Saiyan 4 transformation. Plus the patterns of his hair on his chest look really cool, though I wish his arm hair went all the way down to his wrist. But I also think the black eyeliner looks a lot better than the red. Plus I also think Daima's Super Saiyan 4 would look a lot better if he kept his blue belt. This also would have been a perfect opportunity to have Super Saiyan 4 fight with the Power Pole. Maybe even the Nimbus 2 to give it real Sun Wukong vibes, but he doesn't use either of them in this fight. Though I do still really like this final battle. They really amplify how ape-like Goku is in this form, with the way he runs around on all fours and even swings with his tail. Plus his forearms are really huge in this form. Plus the Kamehameha he does against Goma that bursts through every level of the Demon Realm is one of the coolest Kamehamehas we've seen from Dragon Ball. Plus since even that wasn't enough to defeat him, I was hoping we'd maybe see Goku and Vegeta fuse with the fusion bugs. I was also expecting maybe Majin Buu and Do to fuse with the fusion bugs to become Dooku, but the fusion bugs are never used once in this entire show, so I don't get why they even bothered introducing them if they weren't going to use them. Plus Shin could have given them his Batara earrings so they could become Super Saiyan 4 Vegeta or Gogeta, but we don't get that either. Not only that, but the way they ultimately defeat Goma is actually pretty lame. All they had to do was hit him in the back of the head 3 times to get the third eye out, and I hate when enemies have a really exploitable weakness like Cell Max. Though I will say I do like that Majin Buu is the one to ultimately do it, which leads to him becoming the new Demon King. But for some reason, Shin says that Arinsu should be the new Demon King because she still has some good in her, and that's honestly the stupidest thing I've ever heard. She literally said before that under her rule she wants to make the Demon Realm an even worse place. Like, wasn't the whole point of this to stop her from ruling the Demon Realm? No wonder Shin is so bad at his job. But thankfully she says no and Ku becomes the rightful Demon King. But if defeating the previous Demon King is enough to make you the new ruler, then wouldn't that make Majin Buu the Demon King since he defeated Dabra? Well, even though there was a lot of things I didn't like about this last episode, I thought the animation for all the fights were great, and Goku Super Saiyan 4 is obviously really cool and all, but I thought Vegeta had some really great moments as well, especially that gag between him and Bulma. Plus I loved when he called Super Saiyan 3 Ultra Vegeta 1. But as for Piccolo, yeah, he was still useless. So that's the end of Dragon Ball Daima. Well, except we actually get a short after-credits scene of the gang going back to the store where they bought the Revive and Fusion bugs. So the show ends on one last gag where they realize the Tertian Oculus is just an item you can buy in a store, and she even has a bunch of other ones in stock too that have just been forgotten about. It's a very Toriyama gag, which makes it a great way to end this show. What also stands out is the animation. The character animation in this entire scene is some of the best we've seen in the entire franchise. Although I went into the show with low expectations due to its premise, and there were a few low points, I'm glad to say that this show greatly surprised me. My main problems with this show mostly came from the writing and its pacing. The fact that they were writing the story as they were animating it really shows in the final product. It made the show seem like they were making things up as they went along, or that the entire script came just from the first draft. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't have an outline for what they wanted the whole show to be. They definitely could have done a lot more to tighten things up, even with the short episode count, plus it would have helped with the pacing. Like, they could have had Goku get to the Demon Realm much faster. They could have put the episode with the Giants before the fight with the Tamagami, so that once they get to the second Demon Realm, they could really see how dangerous it is, and then have them leave after they get the Dragon Ball. And they definitely could have gotten rid of the entire bootleg Ginyu Force. There were a bunch of things in this show that seemed to get very little payoff, and I wish we got to see more of the side characters do stuff. Not just characters like Piccolo or people from the original Dragon Ball Z cast, but also characters like Pansy become pretty useless in the second half. But still, despite all its shortcomings, I think the good far outweighed the bad with this show. I didn't think I would enjoy Goku and his friends being turned into Kid again, but it made for some really fun moments and fights. Plus, it's no surprise that Masuko Nozawa is still able to put in an amazing performance all these decades later. Now that Toriyama's gone, it's going to be a sad day when she passes as well. Speaking of which, a lot of people have speculated that the reason why the whole voice cast is different when they're turned into kids is because they're trying to test the waters for a whole new voice cast once these actors get too old. I mean, it's certainly possible, but I think all the new actors did a really great job as these characters. Plus, I really liked almost all the new characters. Goma and Arinsu were fun villains, both for different reasons. Ku and Do really grew on me, Pansy was like a better version of Pan from GT, Florio is great, and of course the best one of all is Hybis. So not only do we get a bunch of new characters in a cool new setting, we got a bunch of great fights, funny gags, and some absolutely beautiful animation. Not to mention all this new lore we got as well. So overall, I'm really happy with the show we ended up getting. It really did feel like a tribute to everything Dragon Ball. It had Kid Goku with the Power Pole going on a mystical adventure, plus the tone was much more in line with that show. It had the epic fights of Z and the world building like in Dragon Ball Super, and of course it has a lot in common with Dragon Ball GT as well. In fact, the creators of this show said they made it with the intent of it being a new version of Dragon Ball GT. Even though the show did have some troubles along the way, I still view it as a fun little non-canon side adventure. It's kind of the same way I look at a lot of the Dragon Ball Z movies, except this is way better than most of those. But non-canon or not, either way this was a fun adventure. The longer Dragon Ball as a franchise keeps going on, the more ridiculous it seems to get. We have so many new forms now with different colored hair, and a lot of stories seem to be repeating the same beats over and over. And even though I can't really say Daima is much different, I'm okay with it so long as we keep getting new things we've never seen before. And in this show we got some great new characters, cool new locations, and a bunch of creative fights. I'm not sure what the future for Dragon Ball holds. I mean, I'm sure we'll get new movies and games, but I have no idea what the next anime project will be, or when we'll get it. But even though it won't be the same without Akira Toriyama, I can confidently say that I'm excited for the future of Dragon Ball. I would take more stuff like Dragon Ball Daima over Dragon Ball Super 2 any day, and I'm especially glad that we got this new show within the same week as a great new Dragon Ball game. Getting 2 Dragon Ball Passion projects back to back that were both labors of love and tributes to the franchise as a whole was something we desperately needed at the time.